can't believe he did that. I think it's funny. No, it's not.
There are men who wear their worth on their sleeve, in the literal sense. The cut of a jacket, the shine of a shoe, the brand stitched somewhere visible. And there are men who wear something else entirely, something that does not photograph as easily, and that most rooms are not equipped to recognize until it's standing directly in front of them. This is the story of Jordan Banks, and the wedding where one room learned the difference. The reception was being held at the Wellington Estate, a venue outside Charlotte, North Carolina, that had hosted weddings for the kind of families who measured success in the cost per plate. The bride's family, the Carmichaels, had spared nothing. $30,000, by the most conservative estimate floating around the reception tables, had gone into the flowers alone, the orchestra, the 7-tier cake, the open bar that had been pouring since 4 in the afternoon. Jordan Banks sat near the back of the room, at a table that had been assigned almost as an afterthought, in a suit that did not match the room's general standard of expense. It was a good suit, dark navy, well-fitted, carefully maintained, but it was 3 years old, purchased off a department store rack during a sale, and it did not carry a particular sheen of fabric that cost more than most people's monthly rent. On his wrist was a watch that had belonged to his late uncle. The leather band was worn through in one small spot near the buckle. The crystal face had a faint scratch across the lower right corner that caught the light at certain angles. Jordan had polished the case that morning, the way he always did before wearing it, a small private ritual that had nothing to do with anyone else in the room. Brittany Carmichael, the bride's cousin, was seated at the next table over, surrounded by a group of guests who had spent the better part of the evening discussing real estate and a recent trip to Aspen. She had noticed Jordan earlier in the evening. The suit, specifically, and the watch, which she had glanced at twice with particular curiosity of someone cataloging things. She leaned toward her table, just far enough that her voice carried to the table beside it. She said, "I didn't realize the groom's side had a discount section." She laughed. 2 or 3 people at her table laughed with her. The easy, automatic laughter people who had decided, without examining the decision very closely, that the joke is safe because the target is unlikely to push back. Jordan looked down at his sleeve for a moment. He said nothing. He picked his fork back up and returned to his plate. Jordan had grown up in a modest 2-bedroom house in Gastonia, raised primarily by his mother and his uncle Reggie, a man who worked as a machinist for 31 years and who had given Jordan, on his 21st birthday, the watch he was now wearing, the only thing of real material value Reggie had ever owned, and the thing he had wanted Jordan to have above everything else he might have left behind. Jordan's father, Theodore Banks, had not been a constant physical presence in his childhood. Theodore had spent Jordan's early years building a small chain of regional hotels into something larger, working hours that kept him away from home more often than either of them would have liked. But Theodore had never been absent from what mattered. He called every Sunday without fail. He showed up for every graduation, every milestone that could be scheduled in advance. And he had taught Jordan, in the limited time they did have together, a small number of principles that Jordan had carried with him long after he was old enough to evaluate them for himself. One of those principles was simple. Theodore had said it more than once, in slightly different words each time, but always landing in the same place. A man's worth was never going to be found in his sleeve. Jordan had believed it before he had any particular reason to test it. He believed it more now, sitting at the back table of a $30,000 wedding in a suit that had cost less than the centerpieces. By the time Theodore Banks' company, Banks Hospitality Group, had grown into one of the largest privately held hotel and event venue operators in the Southeast, Jordan was already an adult with his own modest life, his own modest apartment, his own preference for staying out his father's business dealings entirely. He worked as a high school math teacher. He drove a used Honda. He did not advertise who his father was, not out of shame, but because he had never seen the relevance of anything he was actually doing with his own life. The Wellington Estate, the venue hosting tonight's wedding, was one of 14 properties under Banks' Hospitality Group umbrella. The Carmichael family, booking the venue 8 months earlier, had worked exclusively with a regional events coordinator and had never had reason to encounter the ownership structure above her. They knew the venue by its name. They did not know whose name was on the deed. Reverend Walter Boyd, officiating the ceremony, had known Jordan's family for over 20 years. He had baptized Jordan as an infant. He had watched Theodore build his company from a single property into 14, watched him do it without ever once losing the particular humility that had made him, in Reverend Boyd's estimation, one of the few wealthy men he had ever fully trusted. Reverend Boyd was seated at the head table when Brittany made her comment. He heard it clearly. He watched Jordan's quiet, unbothered response. He said nothing in the moment. It was not his place to intervene in another family's reception, but he made a quiet decision about what he would say later when it was his turn to speak. Jordan stood from the table a short while later and walked toward the gift table near the entrance, partly to stretch his legs and partly to put a small amount of distance between himself and the conversation still continuing at the next table. His cousin Marcus found him there. Marcus asked, quietly, if he was all right. Jordan looked at the watch on his wrist for a moment. He said, "My father taught me that a man's worth was never going to be found in his sleeve. I believed him before I had any reason to. I believe him more now." Marcus did not press further. They stood together for a moment near the gift table, away from the noise. Back at her table, Brittany was retelling the comment to a new arrival who had just sat down, enjoying the laughter a second time. The way you enjoy a joke more once you confirmed it landed the first time. She had no way of knowing that at that exact moment, a black town car was pulling into the Wellington Estates Circular Drive, delayed nearly 2 hours by a canceled connecting flight out of Atlanta. Theodore Banks stepped out of the car in a charcoal suit, the kind of fabric that does, in fact, carry a particular sheen, though Theodore had never once in his life dressed with the intention of being noticed for it. He walked toward the entrance. The venue's general manager, recognizing him immediately, hurried across the lobby with visible urgency. "Mr. Banks," the manager said, "we weren't told you'd be attending tonight personally. Is everything all right with the property?" Theodore said, "I'm here for my son's cousin's wedding." Jordan Banks, "Why is my son sitting at the back table?" The manager's expression shifted in the span of about 2 seconds. First confusion, then a slow, dawning recognition of what the question implied, then something closer to alarm. He did not have an answer that would survive the question being asked a second time. He said, "I'll handle it immediately, sir." Word does not travel quickly at a wedding reception in any formal sense. No one makes an announcement. No one taps a glass. But it travels nonetheless, in a particular way that information moves through a room of people who are watching everything happening around them even while pretending not to. By the time Theodore Banks crossed the reception hall toward his son's table, a noticeable portion of the room had already turned to watch, having absorbed in fragments and whispers who the man in the charcoal suit actually was. Brittany Carmichael watched him walk past her table. She watched him stop at the back table, the one she had been making jokes about for the better part of an hour, and place a hand on Jordan's shoulder. She watched Jordan stand, embrace his father, and the two of them exchange a few quiet words. She watched the venue's general manager appear at the table moments later with 2 additional place settings, already being arranged at the head table, near the wedding party itself. She did not say anything further about discount sections for the rest of the evening. Her parents, who had booked the Wellington estate 8 months in advance through a coordinator who had handled all the logistics, spent a notable portion of the next hour in quiet, hurried conversation near the bar, working through the sudden and uncomfortable recalculation of exactly whose family they had been making jokes about all evening, and whose goodwill they might now need going forward. Given that Banks' hospitality group also happened to own the venue for their daughter's wedding, scheduled for the following spring, Jordan, for his part, did not change his demeanor at all. He sat beside his father at the head table in the same suit he had worn all evening, the same watch on his wrist, neither of which he had any intention of explaining or justifying to anyone who had not asked him directly. When Reverend Boyd rose to give his toast later that evening, he looked out across the room at the flowers that cost more than most people's monthly rent, at the orchestra still warming up in the corner, at Jordan sitting quietly beside his father near the head table. He raised his glass. He said, "I have known this family for over 20 years. I have watched a man build something extraordinary out of very little, and I have watched him raise a son who understands, better than most people in rooms like this one ever will, that the things worth having were never going to be the things you could see from across a table." He looked briefly in Jordan's direction. He said, "Some men dress for the room they're in. Some men dress for the truth of who they are, and let the room catch up." He raised his glass higher. He said, "Tonight, I watched the room catch up. He wore truth. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who has ever been judged by what they were wearing instead of who they are. And tell me in the comments, who do you think was more embarrassed by the end of the night, Brittany or her parents? I will see you in the next story."